1. Ancestral spirits. In the beginning was Olodumare, the essence of all that is and more. He created everything, from the worlds to the gods and even fragile man. Death was his final creation. Initially, men did not die, they grew to immense sizes before shrinking into feeble old people. Overwhelmed by their long lives, they prayed to Olodumare, beseeching him to free them from this burden. In response, he created Iku, who was tasked with reaping the lives of men once their destinies had been fulfilled. Iku is death. He takes lives whether a man is awake or asleep. He does not discriminate between a child and an elder. Once your time is up, there is no escaping Iku. Nikir knew Iku was always hovering nearby, seeking whom to consume, but that was not her main concern right now. She found herself alone on a dark, deserted street. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist in ways that made her skin crawl. "Where the hell am I?" she muttered, squinting to make sense of the unfamiliar surroundings. The air was thick, each breath feeling like it had to claw its way down her throat. Then she heard it, footsteps, too fast and heavy to belong to a person, like the clang of metal against stone. Her chest tightened. This can't be Iku, she thought, trying to reassure herself. After all, she had already paid him his dues. A bark split the air, sharp and vicious. Her blood ran cold. She spun around and saw it, a hulking dog, its eyes glowing with malice, saliva dripping from its bared teeth. Her heart slammed against her ribs as her deepest fear came to life. Without thinking, she bolted. She could hear the beast's claws scraping against the pavement as it pursued her. She did not dare look back. She vaulted over a fence, her muscles burning with the effort. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe she was safe, but a snarl shattered that hope as the dog effortlessly leaped over after her. She sprinted toward the house, yanking at the door handle. It would not budge. "Help me! Help me!" she screamed, banging on the door with desperate fists. A light flickered on inside, just for a moment, but it was too late. The dog was inches away, its jaws wide open, ready to rip her apart. She could almost feel its hot breath as it lunged. She screamed, her voice raw with terror. Nikir jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The echoes of her screams still lingered in her ears. It had only been 3 years since she arrived in America from Nigeria, but nightmares like these had become a routine torment. She sat up in bed, trying to steady her breathing, the images of the beast still vivid in her mind. America was supposed to be a fresh start. She and Tunde had sold the ancient artifact they smuggled in, and her share of the profit was enough to secure a comfortable life. After a month of searching, she reconnected with her mother, whom she had wrongly presumed dead, and managed to bring her to America. Nikir invested in real estate, splurged on luxuries, and indulged in the pleasures of her new life. The crisp notes of success surrounded her, designer handbags, spa treatments, fine wine. Back then, her biggest challenge was finding ways to fill her time. She joined a gym, took up Yoruba lessons, even learned self-defense and shooting. Life seemed perfect. But perfection was an illusion. The curse still clung to her like a shadow. She realized it had not been left behind in Nigeria when, one afternoon, she heard the howls, the same haunting sound that always signaled its arrival. She had rushed outside just in time to see a car's tires fly off. The vehicle spun out of control, striking a security guard before a bus crushed him in a gruesome end. The curse's randomness sickened her. It killed without reason, with no regard for innocence or guilt. Over time, she found a way to manipulate it. If she accepted the curse and chose its victims, she could steer its bloodlust. But that did not make it any easier. Each time she marked someone, she felt a chill creep into her bones, a reminder of the darkness she carried within. Her targets were lowlifes, criminals, but the guilt gnawed at her all the same. At night, she would dream of faces twisted in rage, of cold hands reaching out to drag her into their misery. She hated it, but denying the curse was worse. The one time she resisted, it punished her by numbing her hand, the tingling creeping up her arm day by day. It was a painful reminder that if she refused it for too long, it would take her piece by piece until there was nothing left. Nikier had moved away from her mother to avoid awkward questions about her late-night outings. But the worst part was hiding it from Tunde. They had grown close over the years, and though it seemed he had left his shady dealings behind, their relationship grew strained once she realized the curse was still active. He noticed her absences and grew concerned, pressing her for answers she could not give. She put distance between them, afraid of what he might discover. He took it as a sign she was not interested in it, and they settled into an uneasy friendship. Today, she needed a break from her spiraling thoughts. Nikier headed to Tunde's art gallery, seeking some calm in the familiar setting. She spotted him across the room and approached him. "This is an amazing piece," she said, admiring a life-size statue of a black man holding a double-edged axe. The figure's muscles were etched in harsh lines, its expression both fierce and noble. Tunde turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. He had not expected to see her. "Doesn't it remind you of someone we know?" he asked, his voice laced with something unspoken. "Oh my God!" Nikier gasped, covering her mouth. Her eyes darted between the statue and Tunde. Something felt off. Was it his tone, the tension in his stance? But her reaction was not just about him. The memory hit her like a punch. "That's the guy who chased us all the way to the airport in Lagos, trying to kill us and recover the statue." "You guessed right," Tunde replied, a smirk tugging at his lips. "What was his name again?" "My grandfather told us." "Oh. Ogu, something?" "Ogunshala. How could you forget?" "That guy was one heck of a savage," Tunde said, shaking his head. "Yeah, but he was also kind of cute," Nikier giggled, trying to lighten the mood. Tunde could not hide his bafflement. He had never understood how she could see anything attractive in a man who tried to kill them. "Well, here we are now, rich, happy, and living in America," he said, forcing a grin. "Last time I checked, he didn't wield an axe or wear primitive clothing," Nikier said, tracing her fingers along the carved blade. There was something unnervingly lifelike about it. "You didn't see him when my crew and I stole the statue," Tunde countered. "He was dressed in raffia, blending in with the other guards. He had a hatchet that he used to slice clean through one of my guys' necks." "Really?" Nikier replied, raising an eyebrow in mock disbelief. "He threw the axe, and it took my guy's head clean off in one shot," Tunde exaggerated, the memory clearly still unsettling him. Nikier decided to play along. "Well, you cannot blame him. You stole something sacred from him. He was duty-bound to come after you." "Yeah, and here we are, living large, reaping the fruits of my crime," Tunde said, winking. "Yes, we are," Nikier agreed, leaning in closer. Their lips met in a brief, gentle kiss, a reminder of what might have been but never fully became. "Talking about your grandfather, there was this relic he mentioned, the Aduan era," Tunde said, changing the subject. "What about it?" she asked, intrigued. "It inspired me to create this statue. It is the axe of Shango." "The axe of Shango, the Yoruba god of thunder? Is it real?" Nikier asked, her interest piqued. "Your grandfather said it's real, but he also warned it holds immense power." "Why are you bringing this up?" You are not planning to go back to that life, are you? Nikir's voice grew tense, suspicion creeping in. No, we already have more than enough. The stories your grandfather told me now just inspire my art, Tunde replied, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. Did she really think he was still that person? Nikir laughed to ease the tension. No wonder you designed the axe with lightning bolts. So, cliché, she teased. Tunde chuckled, the tension easing as they shared the moment. For a second, Nikir considered telling him everything, how the curse still stalked her, how she had to choose who would die to save herself. But the words stuck in her throat. She could not burden him with that darkness. Besides, her grandfather had said that if the curse was not broken in Nigeria, there was still hope. She just needed to find a Santirian priest. She hugged him goodbye and set off to find a Santirian shrine. Tunde watched as Nikir's figure receded into the distance. He almost sighed with relief, though a pang of regret tugged at him. His mind replayed the moment he foolishly mentioned Shango's axe, cursing his big mouth. He had made a promise to himself after escaping Ogunchala's clutches to no more dangerous games, no more high-risk schemes. He would invest wisely, settle down, and start a family. For a while, it seemed like everything was falling into place. He and Nikir had grown closer than he ever imagined. He was convinced she loved him. But then she changed, pulling away with a sudden coldness that gnawed at him like a festering wound. He spent sleepless nights reliving every moment, searching for answers that never came. Worse still, she kept visiting him, unaware that her presence only deepened his heartache. Every glance, every laugh reminded him of what he thought they had, what he had lost. He needed an escape, a distraction to numb the ache. And the old ways, the crooked paths he had vowed to abandon, beckoned him like a familiar vice. Hello, a warm, cheerful voice broke through his thoughts. Tunde turned to see a white woman dressed like a wannabe adventurer, shorts, pedal pushers, and a fisherman's hat that made her look like a budget Indiana Jones. He fought hard not to laugh. Hi, he replied, managing a polite smile. This statue is an amazing representation of Shango, though the attire's a bit off, she said, studying the figure with interest. Yes, I know Shango's colors are red and white, Tunde said, his tone slightly defensive. But this is not Shango. Just a Nigerian man with an axe. Sure, you could say that, she replied with a teasing smile, but that axe is definitely modeled after Shango's. The details are spot on, minus the lightning bolts, of course. She giggled and playfully touched Tunde's shoulder. I am Mary Rose, by the way. We spoke on the phone yesterday. You came highly recommended. Thanks, Tunde replied, subtly stepping away from her flirtatious touch. He kept business and pleasure strictly separate. I was really impressed by the statue you smuggled in from Nigeria, Mary Rose continued, her eyes gleaming with excitement. An artifact that ancient, protected by taboos and superstition, yet you managed to get it here. That is incredible. Tunde's lips curled into a smug smile. When properly motivated, I can achieve some pretty amazing things. I bet, she said with a laugh that floated through the air like a melody. The higher the pay, the greater the effort, right? Exactly. So, you're telling me Shango's axe actually exists? She asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Yes, the Aduan era, the Thunderstone is real, and it's still where it was buried, Tunde said, his voice low, as if sharing a dangerous secret. I have some leads on its location, combining what I know with a few myths. I am confident it can be found. Any idea what it is made of? Metal, wood, she inquired, her eyes narrowing as she assessed his sincerity. Tunde leaned in slightly, enjoying the moment of showing off. Few people know this, but Shango's axe is made of stone, hence the name Thunderstone. He watched her face for a reaction, wondering if she knew that thunderstones were often just small meteorites or rocks believed to be cast down by lightning. He recalled a poem by Wole Soyinka, Hunt of the Stone, about a lightning ritual performed by Shango's priests. Did Soyinka know the axe was truly a stone? The thought amused him. "What makes you think it hasn't crumbled from exposure to the elements?" she asked, a skeptical eyebrow raised. "It was sealed in a sacred calabash, airtight and protected. No corrosion, no decay," Tunde replied confidently. Mary Rose's expression softened into one of eager anticipation. "With your knowledge and the technical skills of my team, this could be a piece of cake." She handed him a check, and Tunde's eyes widened at the six-figure sum. "I guess we're in business, Mary Rose," he said, flashing a grin as they shook hands. As she walked away, Tunde felt a surge of gratitude that he had once crossed paths with Nikir's grandfather, Alabi. The old man had been a treasure trove of secrets, a historian and the lodge's secretary, who knew more about Yoruba traditions, relics, and spiritual practices than any living soul. Alabi's tales often seemed like folklore, but over time, Tunde had learned that behind every story was a kernel of truth. They had unearthed, stolen, and sold countless relics, some sacred, others merely decorative, using Alabi's knowledge. But Alabi had lines he refused to cross. Unlike Tunde, he genuinely believed in the supernatural and respected its power. It was Alabi who once confided in Tunde about Shango's axe, warning him of its volatile nature and urging him never to attempt retrieving it. "It's too dangerous," he had said, his voice heavy with conviction. But Tunde was not one to be scared off by old superstitions, especially not when the promise of wealth loomed so large. As he pocketed the check, a spark of greed lit up in his mind. The old ways were dangerous, yes, but the rewards were undeniable. He had strayed from the path of caution before and lived. Maybe this time would be different, but perhaps it would not. Either way, he was ready to take the risk. Somewhere in New Orleans, Nikir finally found the Santerian shrine she had been searching for. It was nothing like the Babalawo shrine she once visited in Nigeria. On the outside, it looked like every other building, concrete and paint, far from the mud and thatch structure she remembered from home. Inside, the space opened up into a large hall painted in vivid reds and blues, with intricate white designs and colorful beads of varying sizes hanging loosely from the walls. As Nikir made her way closer to the altar, her eyes were drawn to a row of statues lined up against the wall. Among them, one statue stood out, familiar in its form and design. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be the same one? Did Tunde sell it to them, or was this just a replica? She pondered for a moment, feeling inexplicably drawn to the statue. She knew her curse weakened whenever she held it in her hands. "Come closer, me daughter," a voice called out from the altar. The Santerian priestess's accent had a lilting Jamaican twinge. Nikir jumped, startled. She could have sworn no one else was in the room. Moving closer, she noticed the priestess, a dark-skinned woman dressed in a flowing white gown and matching hat, sitting cross-legged on a mat. There was nothing particularly eerie about her appearance, but the boa constrictor coiled around her neck did enough to set the tone. "Whisper to this chain, tell it what you want," the priestess instructed, holding out a strand of beads. What Nikir actually heard was, "Whisper to the chain, tell it what you want." She found it easy enough to translate patois, as it bore a resemblance to Nigerian vernacular. Taking the beads into her hands, Nikir brought them close to her mouth and whispered, "This curse day worry me. Give me solution, a beg." Though she usually avoided speaking in pidgin English, something about the setting, and the priestess's patois, inspired her. The priestess accepted the beads back, then proceeded to draw the 4 cardinal points on a divination board using chalk. She grabbed a chain of 16 beads, spoke to them softly, and blew on them before tossing them into the air. The beads scattered across the board, and the priestess studied their arrangement closely, marking dashes for each one that landed face up and 2 dashes for those that landed otherwise. All the while, the snake slithered freely around her body, its jaws opening lazily as if yawning. Once the priestess finished her observations, she began chanting. Blood flows through your veins. Dear still life fire to live. Search fi why you left behind. Sacrifice your blood to your children. Closure to receive de blessings. Tragedy over something, calamity brings disaster. Why start badly why end gravely as well. D dog wears a shirt of fire. D leopard a shirt of blood. D cat dad of rags. But all D animals which kill and eat other animals are D same. Nikier felt a wave of confusion wash over her. The words were cryptic, their meaning elusive. How could they possibly help her? Tunde tried to call Nikier, his fingers tapping the screen with increasing urgency, but each call went straight to voicemail. Her phone was off. He frowned, a knot of worry tightening in his stomach. After a few failed attempts, he did not leave a message, deciding it was probably better not to disturb her. With a final resigned look at his temporarily closed gallery, he grabbed his bags and headed for the airport, his steps weighed down by an uneasy anticipation. 9 hours later, Tunde and Mary Rose emerged from the terminal at Murtala Muhammad Airport, Lagos, Nigeria. Mary Rose's face crinkled in discomfort as the intense heat slapped her. Sweat immediately began to bead on her forehead, trickling down her face and neck. She wiped her brow with a tissue, her irritation palpable. The air conditioning in the terminal seemed to have failed, and the oppressive humidity only compounded her discontent. Around them, the airport buzzed with chaos. Passengers jostled in disorganized lines, shouting over one another, while immigration officers, their uniforms crisp yet stained with wear, leaned against counters with outstretched hands, their gestures a disheartening blend of authority and solicitation. Mary Rose's eyes widened, her discomfort turning to distaste. Her fingers drummed impatiently on her luggage, her frustration growing with every minute. As they stepped outside, the sun blasted them with a scorching wave. Mary Rose squinted against the glaring light, her skin prickling under the relentless heat. Without sunscreen, she felt as though the sun itself was conspiring against her, and she silently cursed her oversight. She raised her hand to shield her eyes, trying to catch her breath as the heat enveloped her. So, where do we start? Mary Rose asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion and impatience, her eyes darting around the sun-drenched surroundings. Tunde adjusted his hat, his eyes, shielded by sunglasses, remained focused and resolute. Shango vanished into the earth, leaving behind his crown and the Aduan era in Kaso, a small village in Oyo State. Mary Rose's face twisted with skepticism. And how exactly are we supposed to find it? We need something more concrete. A tree is not exactly a reliable marker. Tunde's jaw tightened. He stood atop the tallest Irako tree, proclaiming his departure. The axe and crown are said to be buried there, according to legend. Mary Rose's brow furrowed. So, a tree marks the spot? That is a bit vague. How do we know that trees are not dead? We might as well be looking for a needle in a haystack. Tunde's tone sharpened. You clearly don't understand the significance of the Irako tree. Mary Rose's frustration boiled over. How would I? Irako is not even an English word. Tunde rolled his eyes. Well, Irako is a massive hardwood tree from West Africa, capable of living for centuries. It is sacred and protected, so it is never cut down. Mary Rose raised an eyebrow. Her expression shifted to a mixture of impatience and confusion. Try being more specific. Just say hardwood tree or African teak. Yes, boss, Tunde replied, his sarcasm evident. He had no idea that the English term for Irako was African teak. Mary Rose wagged a finger at him. African teak has been over-harvested because it is used in herbal medicine. The bark is powdered for treating coughs, heart problems, and exhaustion. The latex is used to combat tumors and clear digestive issues. It is even on the IUCN Red List as near threatened. Tunde stared at her, baffled. I'm sorry, what an IUCN? Mary Rose sighed, exasperated. It's a global conservation body, but never mind. Tunde's frustration boiled over. Would you just keep quiet? That might be a worldwide survey, but here in Nigeria the Irako tree is sacred and protected. Tunde was not exaggerating. In Yoruba culture, the Irako tree was revered as the tree of life. Ancient villages were often built around these trees, their significance woven into the fabric of daily life and spirituality. Mary Rose looked at Tunde, a mix of skepticism and reluctant hope in her eyes. Despite her reservations, she had to trust him. The Aduan era could be her big break. She hoped that despite his shady past, Tunde's knowledge of local myths and artifacts would lead them to success. As they boarded the air-conditioned 26-seater bus, the cool air inside was a welcome relief from the stifling heat. Mary Rose sank into her seat, gazing out the window at the sprawling landscape. The adventure ahead was fraught with challenges, but the promise of discovery fueled her determination. She hoped that this journey would prove fruitful and make her the discoverer she aspired to be. The trip started in Ibadan, a bustling city that offered the comfort of modern amenities. They spent their first few days in a posh hotel with air conditioning, a swimming pool, and even a rooftop bar that offered sweeping views of the city's hilly landscape. In those early days, Mary Rose felt like she was on an adventure rather than a grueling expedition. They casually visited historical sites, the old palaces, shrines, and museums, taking notes and gathering leads with the ease of tourists. The locals were friendly, eager to share stories and point them to artifacts and places of interest. Spirits were high, and the team enjoyed the relaxed pace, confident that they were gathering valuable clues. Tunde seemed confident, his local knowledge impressive as he navigated them through conversations that were half folklore, half history. The search had an air of excitement and potential. But as the days turned into a week, the real work began. They left behind the city's comforts and plunged into the thick forests of Oyo. The second phase of their journey was a stark contrast to the simple living of Ibadan. Now, there were no air-conditioned rooms, no swimming pools, just tents and sleeping bags laid out under canopies of trees that stretched endlessly toward the sky. The first week in Oyo was still hopeful, almost exciting. The villagers they met, many living in isolated hamlets, whispered of hidden places where spirits still walked and ancient gods were said to have once lived. Tunde and Mary Rose followed these leads with enthusiasm, often trekking for hours through rough terrain, pushing through dense undergrowth and muddy trails. The first potential site was a grove near an abandoned settlement. An elderly woman, her eyes clouded with age but sharp with memory, claimed the place was once sacred to Shango. The team set up camp nearby, working under the dappled shade of ancient trees, their roots twisting like the veins of the earth. They dug with energy and anticipation, convinced that the soil would yield something, a relic, a sign, anything. Hours turned into days, and still, they found nothing but dirt and disappointment. The mood shifted from hopeful to anxious, each fruitless dig gnawing at their morale. Undeterred, Tunde insisted they move on to the next site, this time along the banks of a winding river. The river was murky, its banks slippery with wet clay. Local myths suggested that Shango's power was tied to the flow of this river, that his final resting place might be hidden beneath the dark waters or along the nearby hills. The team toiled tirelessly, taking samples, scanning the area, even enlisting the help of a few local laborers to dig deeper into the earth. But once again, the search ended in nothing but exhaustion. The river's secrets remained buried if they ever existed at all. As the days dragged on, the once tight camaraderie began to fray. The team grew irritable, snapping at one another over trivial matters. Mary Rose, usually composed and precise, started to lose her patience. The equipment was getting worn, tempers were getting short, and every night the air was filled with the grumbles of frustrated archaeologists. Still, Tunde pressed on, convinced they were just one clue away from success. He would stay up late by the campfire, poring over old maps and notes, tracing routes that twisted through the forests like the stories he had heard from village elders. But their hope began to wither as quickly as the food supplies they carried. Every time they were sure they had found something, a peculiar rock formation, an oddly shaped tree, they would dig with renewed vigor, only for the ground to mock them with emptiness. The myth of Shango's axe was beginning to feel like just that, a myth, a phantom they had been chasing through shadows and superstition. The locals, once helpful and intrigued, started closing themselves off. There were whispers that the strangers were stirring up old spirits, that their questions were unwelcome, that they were meddling in things best left alone. The dusty road leading into a particular village was almost deserted, save for a small group of men who stood in the way, their expressions as unyielding as the earth beneath them. The leader, a weathered man with lines etched deep into his face, took a step forward, blocking their path with a silent authority. His eyes, cold and unblinking, locked onto Tunde and Mary Rose, a warning embedded in his gaze. "The land remembers," he said, his voice gravelly, each word measured like a threat, "and it doesn't forget those who dig where they shouldn't." Tunde's hand twitched at his side. He was a man with little patience for such theatrics, and the old man's words grated on his nerves. Without a second thought, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a handgun, the metallic click slicing through the tense silence. The villagers stiffened, but they didn't back down. Their leader's eyes didn't even flicker as he stared down the barrel, his resolve as immovable as stone. The air crackled with unspoken defiance. "Tunde, what the hell are you doing?" Mary Rose's voice was sharp, cutting through the moment like a knife. She stepped forward, her face a mask of controlled anger. "Put that away. Now." Tunde's grip tightened on the gun, his eyes narrowing in frustration. "They're bluffing," he muttered, his voice low, but there was a hint of doubt beneath his bravado. "We can't let them scare us off." Mary Rose shook her head, her gaze never leaving his. "We're here to study history, not to make more of it with bullets. This isn't the way." For a moment, Tunde seemed to hesitate, the gun wavering slightly in his hand. But then his expression hardened. "We're wasting time," he said, his voice steely. "We need that artifact, and they're just trying to keep us from it. If we wait, we'll lose our chance." Mary Rose crossed her arms, her jaw set in determination. "We're not sneaking around like thieves in the night, Tunde. We do this by the book, or we don't do it at all." Tunde glared at her, but he could see there was no budging her. Her integrity was her armor, and she wore it well. With a frustrated grunt, he holstered the gun, turning away from the group. "Fine," he spat, more to himself than to her. "But if you're not going, I will. We're too close to turn back now." That night, Tunde gathered a small team, a ragtag group who were willing to risk the dangers for the promise of what lay beneath the soil. They moved under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the thick night air. Tunde led the way, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of success. But the dig was a disaster. The ground was unyielding, and the few tools they had brought were inadequate. Hours passed with little progress, the frustration growing as the night wore on. It became clear they were in over their heads. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in muted shades of pink and gray, they abandoned the dig, defeated and exhausted. The failure weighed heavily on Tunde, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. They were almost out of the village when they saw the villagers waiting for them, blocking the road once again. This time, there was no warning, no exchange of words. The tension snapped like a taut wire. Tunde's hand flew to his gun, pulling it out in a fluid motion. The villagers responded in kind, weapons appearing in their hands as if by magic. The world seemed to hold its breath for a heartbeat, and then all hell broke loose. The crack of gunfire shattered the morning stillness, bullets whizzing through the air as both sides clashed. The once quiet village erupted into chaos, the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoing off the walls. Tunde fired wildly, his desperation clear in the way he squeezed the trigger again and again. The villagers were relentless, their determination fueled by something far deeper than greed or fear. They fought with the ferocity of those defending sacred ground. In the end, it was clear they were outmatched. Tunde's team was forced to retreat, dragging their wounded with them as they fled the village. The artifact remained buried, untouched, and the land, as the old man had warned, remembered. By the third week, the weather turned against them. Torrential rains came daily, turning trails into rivers of mud and soaking their gear. The once sturdy tents sagged under the weight of water, leaking from every seam. Each day started with squelching boots and ended with soggy clothes clinging to tired bodies. The jungle was relentless, the air thick with humidity and the constant hum of insects. Sleep was fitful, and every creak in the dark night felt like it came from some unseen presence, watching, waiting. The breaking point came after another fruitless dig in a desolate clearing. The ground was swampy, the air stifling, and the surge turned up nothing but frustration. Mary Rose stood there, rain dripping from her hair, her face a mask of weariness. "This is it, Tunde. I have had enough. We are chasing fantasies while the rain drowns us, and the locals curse our names. It is time to call it quits." Tunde looked at her, his usual swagger drained by days of failure, but beneath the fatigue was still a flicker of stubborn defiance. "Mary Rose, I know you are tired, and I get it. We have hit wall after wall, but that is what happens right before a breakthrough. Give me one more week. Just one. And if we still find nothing, I will personally refund every kobo you have spent. You have invested too much to walk away now." Mary Rose stared at him, torn between the rational decision to cut her losses and the irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the storm before the calm. "One more week," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that is it, Tunde. 1 week, and I am done." Tunde nodded, though doubt was gnawing at him too. They both knew this was the last stretch, the point where dreams either turned into reality or crumbled into dust. As the rain kept falling, drenching the weary camp, it seemed like nature itself was daring them to continue. But neither of them was ready to back down, at least, not just yet. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village as the team gathered around the fire, the flames crackling and sending sparks into the cooling night air. Mary Rose sat close to the fire, her face illuminated by its warm glow as she traced a route on an old, weathered map spread across her lap. Beside her, one of the village elders spoke in a low, grave tone, his eyes shadowed with the weight of the stories he carried. "The axe you seek," the elder began, his voice trembling slightly as if the very mention of it disturbed the spirits, "is no ordinary artifact. It is volatile, dangerous. Each time it has been revealed, wars, entire villages wiped from the earth. This is not something to be taken lightly. When Shango, the god of thunder, used this axe, it was with the fury of the ancestors. Disturbing them is sacrilege here. The spirits will grow angry, and they will torment us all. Mary Rose listened intently, her brow crumpled. She respected the elder and the traditions he represented, but a deep sadness welled up inside her. She had seen it before, this unwavering belief in ancient curses, the fear of angering gods long forgotten by the rest of the world. It was a belief that often stood in the way of progress, in the way of knowledge. She sighed softly, her fingers tracing the lines on the map absent-mindedly. "I understand your concerns," she said gently, trying to bridge the gap between them. "But we're here to learn, to preserve history. We're not here to cause harm. Perhaps, if you could help us, with just a little more information, I could see to it that you're compensated. A few dollars for your time, maybe?" The elder's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her, and then at the money she subtly mentioned. His voice, when he spoke again, was laced with disappointment and anger. "You think a few dollars can soothe the wrath of the ancestors? That money can buy your way out of calamity? You do not understand the power you are meddling with."